All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be looking at the experience of living alone with a disability.
Okay.
And even if you know this isn't something that you directly relate to,
Right.
I think there's a lot we can all learn from kind of stepping into that perspective.
For sure.
So we're going to be looking specifically at an excerpt from the LPots podcast,
Okay.
episode 52, part 2. And for folks who aren't familiar with that one, LPOTS is a syndrome that often involves really debilitating fatigue, dizziness.
Right.
So you can imagine how that would add a whole other layer to daily life.
For sure. For sure.
And so what's interesting about the excerpt we're looking at is it really just kind of goes straight into the challenges,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't sugarcoat it.
No.
It just says like, hey, this is the reality.
Yeah.
And it starts with this idea that, a lot of us,
Mm-hmm.
when we picture someone with a disability, we picture someone who has constant care,
Right.
right? There's this assumption that they're not living alone.
Yes.
But statistically, that's not actually the case.
Right. Exactly. A lot of adults with disabilities live on their own.
Millions.
Yeah.
Millions.
It's a huge population.
Absolutely.
And it's something that I think a lot of us just don't see.
Right.
Right? We don't think about it.
Yeah, no, it's often an invisible part of society.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so the source kind of starts going into some of these challenges. And the first one that it mentions
Okay.
is these physical barriers.
Right.
And, it's easy to be like, oh, yeah, accessibility, wheelchair ramps.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that.
It really is. And it's often those everyday things that folks who don't experience those limitations might not even consider.
Totally.
For example, imagine trying to cook a meal, but you have difficulty lifting a heavy pot.
Right.
Or reaching for something on a high shelf when reaching is a challenge.
Right. If you have limited mobility in some way.
Exactly. Just daily tasks that a lot of us take for granted become these hurdles.
Right.
And so it can be really overwhelming, I imagine.
Absolutely.
And then the source points out, it's not just the physical stuff.
Right.
It's also this emotional weight.
Yeah.
And one of the things they talk about is this feeling of being unseen,
Mm-hmm.
of having your experiences kind of overlooked or minimized.
Right.
And I can only imagine how that would feel.
Yeah. And I think that sense of isolation can be really compounded when you're living alone.
Oh, for sure.
Because you have that awareness that if you need help, if something goes wrong,
Yeah.
you might not have someone there.
Right. You don't have that immediate support system.
Exactly.
And that can be, that's a lot to carry.
It is.
Mentally and emotionally.
For sure.
But then this is where I think the source gets really interesting.
Okay.
It makes this distinction between being alone and being lonely.
Right.
Right. Solitude versus loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not just about, physically being by yourself.
Right. It's about your mindset.
It's about your mindset and how you approach that alone time.
Exactly.
And I think that's such an important distinction
It really is.
because it's so easy to just focus on the negative, right?
Right.
But they talk about some really practical things that you can do to find peace in solitude.
Yeah. They had some really good suggestions.
Like, what were some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, they talked about, establishing a routine.
Okay.
Which I think is so important, just to have that structure in your day.
Yeah.
And then also engaging in activities that bring you joy.
Right. Finding those things that give you a sense of purpose.
Exactly.
And they mentioned some specific examples too, right? Like setting up a comfortable reading nook.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or finally tackling that art project you've been putting off.
Yes.
Or even just caring for some houseplants.
That's what I was going to say. Like, even just having some greenery around can make such a difference.
It really can. It's all about creating a space that feels nurturing and engaging in activities that bring meaning to your life.
And I think that can be so empowering.
It is. It's about taking control of your environment and your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. But, the source also acknowledges that social isolation is a very real challenge.
Oh, for sure.
Even when you've kind of created this fulfilling solo life,
Right.
that human connection is still so important.
It is. We're social creatures by nature.
And so what are some of the things that they suggest for kind of combating that isolation?
Well, they talk a lot about the importance of online communities,
Right.
which I think are a lifeline for so many people, especially those with mobility issues or chronic fatigue.
Especially because it can be hard to leave the house sometimes.
Exactly. And there are online communities for almost everything these days. So finding one where you feel seen and understood.
Right, where you feel like you belong.
Exactly. That can be incredibly powerful.
Totally.
And beyond that, it's also about just taking small steps to reach out.
Okay.
You know, sending a message to a friend, scheduling a video call, participating in an online event.
Right, just staying connected.
Exactly. It all helps to chip away at that feeling of isolation. And of course, for those who need more support,
Yeah.
therapy or local support groups can be incredible resources as well.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder. So, I mean, I think as we wrap up this deep dive today,
Mm-hmm.
it's obviously a heavy topic,
It is.
but I hope that what you're walking away with is not just a sense of the challenges,
Right.
but also just this incredible strength and resilience of those who are navigating this every day.
Absolutely. There's so much strength in that community.
Yeah, and I think that even if you're not living with a disability,
Right.
there's still something to be learned from this idea of finding peace and solitude.
Absolutely. We all need that in our lives to some degree.
Yeah, and being intentional about how we cultivate our well-being.
For sure.
So I guess as we close out, I would just challenge you, the listener, to think about what resonated with you most in this conversation. What's one small step that you can take today
Yeah.
to maybe cultivate a little more peace, a little more purpose in your own life?
That's a great question.
Let us know what you think. Until next time.
See you.